guys, so today we will continue on with our weather application, and currently we have this page where we can search for different zip codes, and we also have this weather page and with just a sidebar, but we do need to work on the main content here, which needs another API. So the API is this one here called onCall API. If we go to the API doc, we can see that it takes a latitude and longitude and the app ID, of course, but we don't have this information yet saved. So if we look at the local storage here, we can see that we are saving the name of the city and the weather information, so just the high and the low and the current temperature. But we do need to save the latitude and longitude. So back to our code, we have the search component where we actually press the plus button here, so this plus button right here, and when we click that on click, we are actually setting the cities with the result. So the current cities plus the current result that we pressed the plus on, that result is up here when we actually get the search results. So we need to just add the latitude and longitude here. So the latitude will be data.chords.lat, and I got that from let's look at the API call. Let's make another API call here. So if we look at the API call here, we have the chords object, which has a longitude and a latitude. So we just need to save that to our search result. So we have data.chords.long. So now when we add our city and refresh our dev tools, we can see that we have the latitude and longitude being saved. So that'll help us with our next API, which we need the latitude and longitude for. The other thing I do want to change here is when you press the plus button, it should go to the weather page with the query, the city query being the one that you pressed the plus button on. So let's work on that. So here's where we update the city context page, but what we can actually do is we need to push a new route to the router. So we need to find our router. So that'll be in our app.tsx, we have the router and it takes in a history object. So we should basically just import the same history object. So let's import that. And once we import that, what we can do is on click of this, if the search result exists, we set the cities, and the other thing we need to do is do history.push the new route. So the new route will be weather and the city will be the city name. So we can just get that from our result. So we push that route and then it'll basically go to that page, the new page that we have. Now, this is another thing we need to solve, is not to have duplicates. So instead of doing a set cities, maybe it's better that we go to the city context and instead of exposing the set cities function, what we can do is create a new function. So we'll call that, add city. And we'll take the city information, so that'll be here. And what we should do first is check if the city name already exists or not. So we can use the current cities that already exist and say includes, or let's call it exists, to be equal to cities.sum, and for each city we want to check the city name. If that equals, let's make this C so we don't have duplicate variable names. The sum function will give you a true or false value if there is some city that exists with that name. So in that case, if it exists, then we do nothing, but if it does not exist, then we should actually add it. So that the logic that we had earlier in the set cities, we should just use that in this if statement, and and all we need to do is expose this add city function. So what we'll do is add it to here, to our interface first, and it'll take in a city object and return nothing. And let's add that to the value, or the default value. Okay, and now here, instead of calling set cities, we can call search context dot add city, or sorry, city context add city, and that'll be our result. And you notice that we still want to, even if this city is not added, which means it's already part of our context, we still want to go to the, we still want to push the new route, so the user can, see the second page. So let's do a quick test and add the same city. Let's add the first one here, and we get one city. Let's go back to our page and then do the same zip code, add that, and we don't have any duplicates anymore, but we still get routed to the new page with and we also have the latitude and longitude. To display weather information in more detail on this page, we need to call this other API, which gives us a lot more information. So earlier, when we called an API, we used our own hook called use data. So if we go there, this is where the actual API call happens, and we are using Axios for that. But I wanted to introduce one new library called React Query, and it's very similar to what we created in our use data hook. And what it does is it gives you a context, so which comes with the provider, it's the query client provider. And when you actually use the hook that it comes with called use query, you get things like is loading, errors, and the actual data that comes from this URL. So it's very similar to what we have. And if it's loading, then you display some kind of loading signal. So for this next part, we'll actually install this and try to use it. So let's open our terminal and install. Let's actually go to the documentation first and go to installation. So all it says is to install React Query. So we can do that. And we also need to check out the quick start. So in the quick start, we can see that we have to add a query client provider. So in our application, so we'll just go to our app.tsx, and we have our city provider. We also have our search provider. So now we need to add another provider. And we'll add this on top of our city provider, so all of our application can use this new provider. And let's try to import this from React Query, and query client, let's see what that does. Okay, so we just have to create a new query client. So we can do that outside of our application, so outside the function, because we only really need one instance of it, and just pass that into our provider. So what this will do for you is that the query client will hold all of your queries in a cache. So it's basically in-memory caching. And if you call the same API multiple times, which actually might happen for us, so when you start switching between cities, it'll actually use the cache first. So it'll make your application a lot faster, or actually seem a lot faster, because the API calls will happen in the background. Okay, so in our weather details, we won't actually use the use data hook that we were using before. What we'll actually do is use the use query hook from the React Query package. So what we can do is make a new constant for weather query, and this will be a use query hook. And this takes some options. So the first argument actually is we're actually using the second version of the function which takes in a query key. So the query key is any unique value. So the unique value could be an array, for example. So we'll just make it a constant, make it weather data, and so the array can be any combination of values you want to uniquely identify this particular query, so whenever this runs. So the first thing is just a unique identifier for this type of data. So we're calling weather data. So maybe weather details, since that's what our component is named. And the second argument could be another unique property that you want to use for this particular weather detail. So in our case, we could use city context dot selected city dot name, because that is a uniquely identifying property of our query. And the second argument is actually going to be a function that returns a promise. So we don't actually have a function, so let's create one up here for now. So we'll call it, get weather data, and this will take in the city that we're requesting for, and it'll return a promise. A promise can be created with Axios. So what we'll do is return axios.get, and then we need to actually find out what the URL is. So if we go up here, we can see we have our one call API. Let's make our URL up here. So this will be the URL. And we need to use our key. So the key will be, let's go back to the API and see what everything. So we have app ID. Let's make app ID equal. One thing I forgot to do is we don't actually need to type this in this way. We can actually call an object called params and just put in our properties like that. So what we can do is app ID can be environment.app ID, and then latitude can be city.lat, longitude, and we have units. Let me make sure I'm typing in the same thing. Yep, units will be metric. So our URL now can be really clean. So all we have to do is just make it just the URL without any parameters. And here Axios will take in the URL and then an object for the data. So the data will take in some parameters. And we can actually return the data that comes inside of the Axios object. So this will be response, and then we want to return just the data, response.data. So in here now we have our function that returns us the weather data. So we can just use that here, get weather data. And what it'll take is just a city. So can just pass in city context dot set or selected city. All right, now that we have our weather query all set up, it should react to whenever our selected city name changes. So basically, anytime any of these values change, well, obviously the weather details will not change, but the city name will change from our use effect up here. And then this query will run and we'll get all of our data. So let's go to our page and refresh, and you can see our one call is actually getting created here. And then if we switch to different cities, it gets called again. And that is because our city name changes, and then we get all the data in our weather query object. So in the next video, what we'll do is, instead of just printing some JSON, we'll actually use the query object and update the page with the actual weather data.